Hello to everyone in the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral community and all of our friends. Christos Anesti, Christ is risen. As a reminder, today, in accordance with the tradition, is the last day we greet one another with the Paschal greeting of Christ is risen, truly he is risen, Christos Anesti, alithos Anesti. So proclaim the good news of the resurrection, that Christ has risen from the dead, trampling down death by death and bestowing life on those in the tombs. To those you meet today, we are reminded that we can always rejoice in the resurrection, for it is a truth not only during the Paschal season, but accordance with tradition, this is the greeting that we give one another during this time period. Now, today we're going to continue our reflection on the third Beatitude, Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, with a continuation of our conversation that we began in the previous video on love and how God reveals to us how we ought to love. And moving from God's love for us, today we will reflect on how we are called to love God. And if we recall from the scriptures, of course this comes from a prayer in the Old Testament, we are reminded that our first commandment, the greatest of the commandments, as Christ has pointed out, is that we are to love our God with all our heart, our mind, and our soul, and in at least one of the gospel accounts, also our strength. So we are to love God with all our minds, our hearts, our souls, and our strength. And we'll talk a little bit about the other second great commandment in the next video. So we are called to love God, and love God in these ways with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength means that we are called to love God with the fullness of our being. Our whole self is how we are supposed to love God. And in doing so, we're called to embody this love in certain ways in which we interact in the midst of the world. How we direct this love towards God is expressed in the things that we do. And so we are called to embody this first and foremost in our desire to know, to love, and to serve God in everything that we do. Our prime responsibility is to orient ourselves in the direction of God through the things that we say, the things that we do, and the way that we are in the midst of the world. And this is most perfectly expressed in our capacity to worship, particularly our communal worship, which, although at this time it's limited because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, we are called to worship God. As we found out earlier in the conversation about the Samaritan woman, we are called to worship God in spirit and in truth. That is to say, in the church. Now, this corporate worship in the church is extended to another way in which we express our love to God, which is through our personal prayers. We really ought to, if we love God, get in the habit of communicating with Him. We communicate with God through our prayer. We should form together with our spiritual father, whether it's Father Vasilios here or another spiritual father, a rule of prayer so that we are constantly throughout the day in the habit of speaking to our God, not because it's a rule in the terms of a rule, but because it's what it means to be in relationship, is to actually communicate. We can't expect to be in a relationship with a fellow human being if we don't communicate with them. So how can we say that we are in relationship with God or love God if it's not part of our everyday cycle of things to do, to be in conversation with Him? And not part, really the sustaining aspect, that which grounds us in the totality of our life. Now, in addition to our worship and our prayer, we're also called in the midst of this to recognize our absolute dependency on God. Prayer it expresses the reality that God has given us everything. And we love God in as much as we are able to, with the fullness of our being, with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, because we know that all good gifts, every good gift comes from above, coming down from you, the Father of lights, as we hear in the Epistle to James. And it's beautiful, but it really has to be a grounding aspect, a central reality in our lives. And it also, our love for God is expressed in our openness to Him, our willingness to see how God is moving in our lives, what we're being taught, where we're being led, what we're being called to. Certainly we're called to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, but we're also called to love our neighbor. And the ways in which we do that are dependent on the reality we find ourselves in, our circumstances, our talents. We are unique and unrepeatable beings, though made commonly in the image and according to the likeness of God. But we have to actualize that reality, embody that reality, embody God's love in the world through the way that we live, the words that we use, our actions, and our inactions speak volumes to how we are succeeding or not succeeding in this way of life. We talked about success in a previous video, and success is about manifesting God's love, being God's love, because we are called to be expressing ourselves as beings made in God's image and according to His likeness, and we are made in the image and according to the likeness of a God who is love. And so to be successful in being who we are means to be love. And we express that first and foremost in our love for God, in the ways that we've already said, through worship and prayer and recognizing our absolute dependence on God and our openness to seeing how God is acting in our lives and responding positively to it in a way that's authentic. And then also to love our neighbor as ourselves, which is what we will talk about in the next video. God bless you. We're here for you. We love you. Anything at all that you need, don't hesitate to reach out. Christos Anesti, Christ is risen.